10 years of silent servitude can break a spirit, but for Isla Brennan it only masked a dormant inferno, waiting for the right moment to consume everything in its path. The grand estate of the Ironwood Pack rose from the Teton Mountains like a monument to wealth and ancient tradition. Timber from the family's logging empire had built every polished beam, funded every marble countertop, paid for every crystal chandelier that cast fractured light across rooms where cruelty wore the mask of civilization. To the human world beyond the forest, Ironwood Ventures was simply a booming business. To the werewolves of Wyoming, it was the seat of Matthias Corvain, an alpha whose brutality had perfected itself over decades into something cold and surgical. And in Matthias's carefully constructed hierarchy, Isla Brennan was less than dirt beneath expensive Italian leather. She was 22 years old, though her hands told a different story. The calluses mapping her palms belonged to someone twice her age. The permanent stiffness in her lower back came from years spent kneeling on unforgiving tile. The faint chemical burns scattered across her forearms were monuments to industrial bleach and silver polish applied with such frequency that her skin had forgotten its original texture. Isla knelt in the grand hallway now, her knees pressing into the grooves she had worn into the hardwood over a decade of this exact motion. The rag in her hand moved in steady circles, buffing oak floorboards that already gleamed. Beside her sat a bucket of soapy water, its surface reflecting the afternoon light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, Wyoming stretched wild and free. Inside, Isla existed in a cage built from silence and submission. Her hair hung in a simple braid down her back, dark and unremarkable. Her servant's uniform, faded gray cotton, that had been washed so many times the original color was a mystery hung loose on her thin frame. Most pack members looked through her as if she were furniture. The few who acknowledged her existence did so with contempt or pity, both equally unbearable. But they were all wrong about what lived beneath that submissive surface. Every few hours, like clockwork, heat would bloom in her chest. It felt like claws scraping against the inside of her sternum, demanding release. Her body temperature would spike without warning, a fever that registered at 105 degrees, yet left no other symptoms. Her vision would tint at the edges, the polished wood floor taking on a crimson hue that made her stomach clench with something that felt dangerously close to rage. She had learned to breathe through these episodes. Close her eyes, count to 60, force the fire back down into whatever dark corner of her soul it came from. Dr. Edmund Vale had examined her countless times over the years, always arriving at the same diagnosis with the same dismissive tone. Defective omega, broken biology, a wolf that would never manifest. Isla had stopped questioning it years ago, stopped hoping her 18th birthday would bring the transformation that came naturally to every other wolf. Stopped wondering why her parents had possessed such powerful alpha lineage while she had inherited nothing but their early graves. The memory of that night existed in fragments, sharp-edged and incomplete. She had been 12 years old, small for her age, when shouting woke her in the dark hours before dawn. Her father Declan's voice raised in anger she had never heard before. Her mother Anya's scream cut short, boots on hardwood, heavy and numerous. Isla had hidden in the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, peering through the thin gap as shadows moved past her doorway. She remembered the smell of gun oil and unfamiliar wolves. She remembered the silence that followed the violence. By morning, pack enforcers had found her still curled in the chest, catatonic. By afternoon, the official story had solidified. Border skirmish with a rival pack. Tragic casualties. Alpha Declan and Luna Anya Brennan killed defending Ironwood territory. Their daughter Isla would be cared for by the pack as tradition demanded. In practice, care meant Dr. Vale's clinical assessment 1 week later. It meant assignment to the kitchen staff under the iron rule of Odette Thorne, the head cook, whose wooden spoon had left bruises across more than one servant's shoulders. It meant learning to be invisible. Isla squeezed excess water from her rag and resumed polishing. The Equinox Summit was tonight. Alpha Corvain expected perfection. The delegation from Cedar Fall Pack would arrive within hours to finalize the new territorial treaty, and every surface in the estate had to reflect Ironwood's dominance back at their guests. The sound of heels on marble announced trouble before Isla saw its source. She kept her eyes on the floor, tracking the approaching footsteps through her peripheral vision. Crimson soles, custom-made, worth more than Isla would earn in a year if servants received actual wages rather than room and board. The shoes stopped directly in her line of sight. Celeste Ashford wore her cruelty like she wore her designer gowns, with practiced elegance and complete confidence. The daughter of an East Coast alpha, she had arrived at Ironwood 3 years ago as Matthias's chosen mate, and had spent every day since reminding the pack of their cultural inferiority. She treated Wyoming wolves like medieval peasants who should be grateful for her refined presence. She treated Isla like an insect that had somehow learned to hold a scrub brush. Did I give you permission to stop working? Celeste's voice carried the particular sharpness of aristocratic disdain, each word precisely enunciated. Isla hadn't stopped working. Her hand was mid-stroke on the floorboard. But contradicting Celeste Ashford was a luxury reserved for wolves with a status, and Isla possessed none. I apologize, Miss Ashford. Isla's voice emerged barely above a whisper, carefully devoid of any emotion that might be interpreted as defiance. I was maintaining my pace. The hallway will be completed within the hour. Celeste leaned down and her perfume washed over Isla in an overwhelming wave. Imported jasmine mixed with something sharp and chemical, applied with such excess that it made Isla's eyes water. The future Luna of Ironwood Pack invaded every space she occupied, including the air itself. You will complete it in 30 minutes. Celeste set her mouth close enough that Isla could feel the words. The Cedar Fall delegation arrives at 6. Alpha Corvain is finalizing the most important territorial expansion in a decade. Alpha Ashcroft is not going to walk into my home and see some pathetic Omega loitering in the corridors like unwashed livestock. My home. Celeste had lived here 3 years, but spoke as if she had built the estate stone by stone. Her hands, Isla noticed, trembled slightly as she stepped back. Whether from rage or something else entirely, Isla could not tell. Do you understand me, Isla? You are a stain on this pack's reputation. If I had my way, you would have been exiled to the rogue territories the day you turned 18. The fact that Alpha Corvain tolerates your presence is a mercy you do not deserve. The heat in Isla's chest flared immediate and sharp like touching a bare flame. Her vision blurred at the edges, tinting the polished oak with that familiar shade of red. For one terrifying second, she felt her lips pull back from her teeth. Down. Stay down. We cannot survive exile. We have nowhere to go. Isla forced her breathing to remain steady, forced her expression to remain blank. Yes, Miss Ashford, I understand. Thank you for the reminder. Celeste's laugh was sharp and humorless. Then she lifted one crimson-soled heel and deliberately kicked over the bucket of soapy water. The dirty liquid rushed across the freshly polished floorboards in a spreading wave, soaking into the knees of Isla's uniform, erasing an hour of meticulous work in seconds. Gray water pooled in the grooves between planks, carrying flecks of dirt and soap scum across the gleaming surface. How clumsy of me, Celeste said, her tone suggesting anything but accident. Do it again. And if it is not absolutely perfect when our guests arrive, I will have Alpha Corvain lock you in the root cellar for the remainder of the week. Perhaps some time in the dark will teach you the urgency of your position. The root cellar, windowless, below ground. The temperature dropped to 40 degrees even in summer. The last time Matthias had locked someone down there, a young beta male, the wolf had emerged after 5 days with frostbite and a cough that lasted 3 months. Celeste's heels clicked away down the corridor, each step a small victory she had claimed over someone too powerless to fight back. Isla sat back on her heels, staring at the spreading puddle of soapy water. Her wet uniform clung to her legs. The pressure in her chest built and built and built until she thought her ribs might crack from the force. A sound emerged from her throat, low, guttural, vibrating through her chest cavity like distant thunder. It was a growl. Isla clapped both hands over her mouth, horror flooding through her. Omegas did not growl. Omegas whimpered, submitted, accepted their place in the hierarchy with biological inevitability. The fact that a sound like that had come from her body was impossible. Dr. Vale had confirmed it. Her wolf would never manifest. She had no inner beast to produce such a noise. Yet the vibration still resonated in her bones. She grabbed the mop with shaking hands and began soaking up the spilled water, forcing herself to focus on the physical task. Survive tonight, serve the dinner, fade into the background. 30 more minutes of work, then she could retreat to the kitchens, where Odette's oversight was at least predictable in its harshness. The alternative was the root cellar, and Isla was not certain she would survive that intact. The kitchens of the Ironwood estate existed in a state of controlled chaos even on quiet days. Tonight, with the Cedar Fall delegation expected within the hour, the chaos had evolved into something approaching panic. Odette Thorne commanded the space like a general directing troops in battle. She was a heavy-set woman in her 50s, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face flushed red from the heat of multiple ovens running simultaneously. A wooden spoon served as her scepter of authority, and she wielded it liberally to emphasize her shouted orders. Those carrots are cut too thick. Do you want our guests to think we employ blind cooks? The wooden spoon cracked against the cutting board next to a terrified young beta's hands. Start again. Isla stood near the swinging doors that led to the formal dining room, a heavy silver tray balanced on her fingertips. Crystal water goblets caught the overhead light, refracting it into tiny rainbows across her uniform. Despite the frenetic energy crackling through the kitchen, she felt oddly calm. The agonizing heat that had plagued her all afternoon had receded into a strange thrumming hum beneath her skin. It felt like the heavy electric stillness in the air, just before a massive thunderstorm, when the atmosphere itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of violence. "They are taking their seats." Finn Cartwright appeared at Isla's elbow, whispering urgently. The boy was 10 years old, small for his age, with wide brown eyes that held far too much fear for a child. His mother had fallen ill 2 months ago, and Packlaw had transferred Finn to kitchen service until she recovered. He trembled almost constantly, overwhelmed by the oppressive auras of dominant wolves that saturated the estate. Finn clutched a woven basket of warm bread against his chest like a shield. "Mrs. Thorne Alpha Corvain is already looking angry." He gestured toward the kitchen. "He wants the first course immediately." "Then go, go, go." Odette shoved them both toward the swinging doors. "Isla, you keep your eyes on the table, pour the water, step back, and do not speak. Do not make eye contact. Do not draw attention. Finn, you follow her lead. If you drop a single crumb of that bread on the carpet, I will personally assign you to grease trap duty for a month." Isla pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped into the formal dining room. The space was designed to intimidate. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting warm light across the long mahogany table below. The walls displayed mounted heads of animals killed on pack hunts, their glass eyes reflecting the candlelight. Every element of the room announced power, wealth, and the willingness to destroy anything weaker. At the head of the table sat Matthias Corvain, and his presence alone made the temperature in the room feel 10 degrees colder. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, his tailored Armani suit straining slightly across his chest. Everything about his posture radiated dominance. The way he leaned back in his chair, legs spread wide in a position of absolute territorial confidence. The way his hands rested on the armrests, fingers drumming a slow rhythm that suggested barely contained violence. His face was handsome in a brutal way, when they all sharp angles and cold calculation. His eyes, pale amber and utterly devoid of warmth, tracked everything in the room with predatory awareness. Beside him sat Celeste, transformed from her earlier cruelty into a vision of refined elegance. Her deep emerald gown complemented the diamonds at her throat. Her makeup was flawless. She smiled at the guests with practiced charm, every inch the gracious Luna preparing to rule Ironwood Pack. Only someone who knew her intimately would notice the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped her wineglass slightly too tight. But Isla's attention was drawn immediately to the opposite end of the table. Rowan Ashcroft Alpha of the Cedarfall Pack occupied his chair with a presence that stood in stark contrast to Matthias's aggressive dominance. Where Matthias demanded attention through force, Rowan commanded it through stillness. He was leaner than the Ironwood Alpha, dressed simply in a charcoal button-down shirt that seemed almost casual compared to the formal suits around him. His hair was dark, slightly too long, brushing the collar of his shirt. His face carried the weathered quality of someone who spent more time in the mountains than in boardrooms. But it was his eyes that made Isla's step falter. Gray as winter sky and impossibly calm, they held a depth that suggested old pain carefully transmuted into quiet strength. Where Matthias's gaze cut like a blade, Rowan settled like weight measuring and assessing without the need to intimidate. To his right sat his beta, a broad-shouldered man with copper-colored hair and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Cole Brenner, if Isla remembered correctly from the briefing, Odette had barked at the kitchen staff earlier. He appeared relaxed, but his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging exits and potential threats with practiced efficiency. Isla approached the table with careful, silent steps, the way she had learned to move through the world. Invisible, unthreatening, beneath notice. She began with Matthias tilting the crystal pitcher to fill his water goblet with precise, steady movements. He did not acknowledge her existence. To him, she was simply a function being performed, no more worthy of attention than the furniture. She moved down the table. Celeste, the visiting Beta Cole, a few Ironwood Pack members seated according to rank. Then she reached Rowan Ashcroft's place. As she tilted the pitcher, ice-cold water filling his goblet in a steady stream, Rowan turned his head slightly. Not enough to be obvious. Just a subtle shift that brought his attention fully onto her wrist, where she gripped the pitcher's handle. He inhaled, a small, barely noticeable flaring of his nostrils. And then his gaze lifted to her face, and for the first time in 10 years, someone truly looked at Isla Brennan. The moment stretched. The thrumming beneath her skin spiked in response, vibrating in strange harmony with something she could not name. Most wolves' senses slid right past her, registering nothing but empty space where a defective Omega stood. But Rowan was not looking past her. He was staring with an expression of profound shock mixed with something that looked almost like recognition. "Is there a problem with the water, Alpha Ashcroft?" Celeste's voice cut through the silence, dripping with artificial sweetness layered over barbed warning. Her eyes shot daggers toward Isla, even as her smile remained fixed. "No." Rowan's voice was measured, revealing nothing. His gaze lingered on Isla for one more heartbeat before returning to Matthias. "Just admiring the craftsmanship. Your estate is as impressive as the rumors suggest." "Ironwood Ventures afford certain luxuries," Matthias said, and the pride in his voice was thick enough to choke on. He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced across his stomach. "Now, regarding the logging rights near the river border that your pack has been attempting to claim." Isla released a breath she had not realized she was holding and retreated to the shadows along the wall where the servants were expected to stand. Her heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to hurt. She tried to calm the racing pulse, but the question kept circling through her mind. What had Rowan smelled? Why had he looked at her like that? The dinner progressed with agonizing slowness. Political posturing dominated the conversation. Matthias spoke of territorial expansion, profit margins, the superior quality of Wyoming timber. Rowan responded with quiet counterpoints, never raising his voice yet somehow never yielding ground. Celeste interjected occasionally with carefully calculated charm, playing her role as the perfect Luna to be. Isla watched from her position against the wall, scanning the room with the practiced awarenesses of someone whose survival depended on reading social dynamics. That was when she noticed Finn. The boy was approaching Celeste's side of the table, the silver gravy boat clutched in both hands. Even from across the room, Isla could see how badly he was shaking. The oppressive auras of two powerful alphas in the same confined space were simply too much for his undeveloped omega senses to process. His face had gone pale, sweat beaded at his temples, despite the comfortable temperature. "Do not look at her," Isla prayed silently. "Just pour the gravy and step away. You can do this." Finn reached Celeste's place and lifted the heavy silver boat, tipping it over her plate with painstaking care. At that exact moment, Matthias said something that made Celeste laugh. She shifted in her chair to face him, her pleasure at his comment momentarily overriding her usual calculated control. Her elbow connected with Finn's wrist. The silver gravy boat slipped. Hot, dark brown liquid splashed directly onto the lap of Celeste's custom emerald gown. The dining room plunged into a silence so complete that Isla could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Finn dropped the silver boat. It hit the Persian carpet with a dull thud, spilling the remaining gravy in a spreading stain. The boy immediately fell to his knees, hands clasped behind his neck in the ultimate posture of wolf submission, his small body shaking with terror that went beyond fear into something primal. "I'm sorry." The words came out choked with tears. "I'm so sorry, Miss Ashford. Please, I didn't mean to. Please." Celeste stood slowly. She looked down at the dark stains spreading across thousands of dollars worth of fabric. Her face was a carefully constructed mask, but beneath it, Isla could see rage building like pressure behind a dam. "You filthy little rat." Each word was enunciated with crystalline precision. "Celeste." Matthias's tone held warning, though his expression suggested disgust rather than mercy. "Calm yourself. We have guests." He turned to the two enforcers standing at attention near the door. Large men heavily muscled, who served as Matthias's personal security and enforcers of pack discipline. "Take the boy outside, lock him in the kennels for the week. No food until I decide he has learned appropriate caution." "No!" Finn's scream was pure anguish. "Please, Alpha Corvain, I'm sorry, I'll do anything. Please don't put me in the kennels." The kennels, outdoor chain-link cages where aggressive or disobedient wolves were confined. In April, Wyoming nights still dropped below freezing. A 10-year-old child would not survive a week in those conditions. "Wait." Celeste raised one hand and something in her tone made the enforcers pause. She stepped around the table, looming over Finn's trembling form. The boy had pressed his forehead to the carpet, sobbing into the expensive Persian weave. "The kennels are too merciful for this offense," Celeste said, her voice carrying throughout the silent room. "And Omega needs to learn their place through pain they will never forget. True consequences, not temporary discomfort." She reached down and picked up the serrated steak knife from her place setting. The blade caught the chandelier light, gleaming sharp and deliberate. "Hold his hands out." The two enforcers exchanged glances. Even they, trained to obey without question, hesitated at the command. "Now," Celeste hissed. They stepped forward, grabbing Finn by his thin arms and hauling him to his feet. The boy struggled weakly, but he was 10 years old, and they were fully grown enforcers. They forced his small palms flat against the mahogany table, fingers spread. Celeste raised the knife. A ruined dress costs thousands of dollars, she said conversationally as if discussing the weather. A ruined hand costs nothing to someone already worthless. Rowan Ashcroft leaned forward in his chair, his calm expression finally cracking into something harder. Corvain, he is a child. This is extreme even for internal pack discipline. He is my pack's property, Ashcroft. Matthias's eyes flashed amber in warning, his wolf rising close to the surface. Do not presume to interfere in my house, especially not over a defective Omega who needs to learn the price of incompetence. Celeste's fingers tightened on the knife handle. Finn let out a sound of pure, helpless agony, beyond words, beyond pleading. Just the animal sound of prey knowing the predator's teeth were about to close. In the shadows against the wall, something inside Isla Brennan shattered. The rusty lock on the cage inside her mind disintegrated. The beast tore free. Stop. The word was not shouted. Isla spoke it softly, barely above conversational volume. But the moment the syllable left her lips, it did not just carry sound. It carried weight. Physical, crushing, undeniable weight that slammed into every wolf in the room like a shockwave. An explosion of pheromones blasted outward from Isla's body, radiating in concentric circles of pure dominance. It was not the sweet, submissive scent of an Omega designed to soothe and placate. It was the scent of lightning striking ancient pine forests, sharp and ozone-heavy, and so overwhelmingly powerful that it rewrote the very hierarchy of the room in an instant. The two enforcers holding Finn collapsed. Their knees hit the hardwood floor with identical cracks, hands flying up to clutch at their throats as the sheer pressure of the command forced them into immediate submission. They gasped for air, unable to lift their heads, their wolves utterly crushed by the biological imperative screaming through their veins. Celeste dropped the knife. It clattered against the table before falling to the carpet. She stumbled backward, one hand flying to her throat as if she were being physically choked, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the sudden pallor of her face. Even Matthias, the proud alpha of Ironwood Pack, who had ruled through fear and brutality for 2 decades, visibly flinched. His hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that the wood cracked splinters digging into his palms. Every head in the room snapped toward the shadows. Isla stepped forward into the light of the crystal chandelier. Her faded servant's uniform, still damp from the spilled bucket, seemed absurd against the magnitude of what radiated from her. The submissive posture she had maintained for 10 years had evaporated, replaced by something ancient and absolute. Her spine was straight, her chin was level, her hands hung loose at her sides, completely relaxed despite the power rolling off her in waves. And her eyes, where dull brown irises had been moments before brilliant amber gold, now burned. Not a flash, not a flicker. A sustained, luminescent glow that marked her as something the modern werewolf world had almost forgotten existed. True alpha bloodline. The original Forest Kings. The wolves whose lineage traced back to the first transformation, whose dominance was not learned or claimed, but encoded in their very DNA. Rowan Ashcroft stood slowly from his chair, and unlike everyone else in the room, he appeared completely unaffected by the crushing weight in the air. His expression held profound awe, the kind reserved for witnessing something mythical made flesh. His beta Cole had risen as well, one hand resting on the back of his chair, his eyes wide, but his body language suggesting protection rather than submission. Who? Matthias choked out the words, struggling to speak against the heavy atmosphere. His face had gone red with effort and humiliation. What are you? Isla turned her luminescent gaze to the alpha who had enslaved her for 10 years. The man who had reduced her to furniture, who had allowed his mate to torment her, who had stolen everything from a 12-year-old child and called it mercy. When she spoke, her voice carried that same subsonic frequency, layered beneath the words like a second voice speaking in harmonics only wolves could hear. I am Isla Brennan, daughter of Declan and Anya Brennan, true alpha of the bloodline you tried to erase. The room erupted into chaos. Matthias surged to his feet and his chair toppling backward. Impossible, you are defective. Dr. Vale confirmed it. You have no wolf. You are nothing. Dr. Vale is a liar on your payroll, Corvain. Rowan's voice cut through the noise with quiet authority. The Cedarfall Alpha moved with fluid grace, positioning himself between Isla and Matthias's enforcers, who were still gasping on the floor. Look at her eyes. Feel the air in this room. That is not an Omega's scent. That is not a defect. That is true alpha blood. He turned to face Isla directly, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, wonder, an emotion too complex to name. The Brennan bloodline, he said softly. They told me it had died out. You knew my parents? The question escaped Isla before she could stop it, and for a moment the crushing dominance wavered as human need broke through. I knew of them, BK, Rowan said. Every alpha in the Northwest knew Declan Brennan was building something that threatened the old power structures. And then suddenly he and his mate were dead. Border skirmish, they said. Tragic accident. His winter sky eyes hardened as they shifted back to Matthias. Except it was not an accident, was it, Corvain? Matthias bared his teeth, canines elongating as his wolf fought to surface. She belongs to Ironwood Pack. Her parents pledged their territory to my protection. Their deaths transferred that allegiance to me, along with any pathetic whelp they left behind. Her father was the rightful alpha of this territory, Rowan countered, which makes her claim superior to yours by blood and law. Guards, Matthias's roar finally broke through his paralysis. Subdue her. She is a rogue threat to this pack's stability. The two enforcers on the floor tried to rise. Their biology warred against Matthias's command, every instinct screaming that attacking a true alpha was biological suicide. But fear of their alpha's wrath eventually overcame their better judgment. They pushed themselves up from the hardwood, growling low in their throats. They managed exactly 3 steps before Cole Brenner materialized from his position near the door with brutal efficiency. 2 strikes, both perfectly placed, sent the enforcers crashing through a glass display cabinet. Antique porcelain shattered across the floor, in a shower of fragments and crystal. Cedarfall will not stand by and watch a true alpha be assaulted, Cole said calmly, shaking broken glass from his shoulders. Rowan's own aura finally flared outward, and it was like winter wind rushing through a canyon. Cold, inevitable, powerful. It blended with Isla's ozone-heavy scent, creating a harmony that made the crystal chandelier chime softly overhead and the very foundations of the estate groan. She belongs to Ironwood, Matthias snarled, ripping off his suit jacket. Dark fur sprouted along his forearms as the shift began to take him. Her father was weak, and she is weak. She is my property by right of conquest. Declan Brennan was not weak, Rowan said, and his voice dropped into something cold and cutting. He was murdered, and I have the proof. The room went still again, but this time the silence carried a different quality. Anticipation. Dread. Rowan reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document, placing it on the table with deliberate care. For the past 6 months, my investigators have been working with Jasper Harrow, a senior forensic accountant at Deloitte. They have tracked every dollar you embezzled through Ironwood Ventures. $8.7 million siphoned through shell companies and false invoices. He tapped the document. The money trail leads directly to bribed council members and to payments made to rogue mercenaries. The same mercenaries who ambushed Declan and Anya Brennan 10 years ago in what you called a border skirmish. Matthias's face twisted with rage, but beneath it, Isla saw something else. Fear. The cornered animal fear of a predator, realizing the trap had closed. You stole this territory, Corvain, Rowan continued. You murdered the rightful alpha and his mate. You bribed officials to legitimize your claim. And you kept their daughter drugged and broken to hide the evidence of your crime. Isla's breath caught. The words pierced through the roaring in her mind, each one a revelation that restructured her entire understanding of the past decade. Murdered. Not killed in honorable combat. Murdered by hired killers paid with embezzled money. The memory fragments suddenly clicked into terrible focus. The boots she had seen through the cedar chest crack. The smell of gun oil. The unfamiliar wolves. They had not been rival pack members. They had been mercenaries. Hired, paid, sent by the man who now claimed to be Alpha. You took everything, Isla heard herself say, and her voice did not sound like her own. It sounded like something ancient and furious given human form. My parents, my childhood, my identity. You poisoned me to keep me trapped. You turned me into a ghost in my own home. Dr. Vale had appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, drawn by the commotion. His face had gone the color of old parchment. Matthias turned on him with desperate fury. Tell them, Matthias roared. Tell them she is defective, that her wolf will never manifest. Dr. Vale's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. His eyes darted between Matthias's rage and Isla's luminescent gaze. Finally, he spoke and his voice trembled. I classified her as defective because you ordered me to. You had me add liquid wolfsbane to her meals. Low doses. Oh, just enough to suppress her biology without killing her. You said if anyone discovered she carried true alpha blood, it would destabilize your claim. You said it was necessary for pack stability. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Isla felt something inside her snap. the last tether of restraint that had kept her human in the face of inhuman treatment. A roar tore from her throat, guttural, terrifying, the sound of 10 years of suppressed rage finding voice. The remaining crystal goblets on the table shattered. The windows cracked, fracture lines spreading across the glass like spiderwebs. Matthias lunged forward, claws fully extended, aiming straight for her heart. He never made it. Isla did not even shift. She simply raised one hand and released a concentrated wave of dominance, focused and precise. It hit Matthias like a physical blow. The false alpha was thrown backward, his body crashing over the heavy mahogany table. Food and dishes exploded in all directions. He slammed into the far wall with a sickening crunch of impact, then collapsed into a heap of broken wood and spilled wine, gasping for breath. His wolf, which had been rising to the surface moments before, retreated completely, utterly crushed by the weight of her bloodline. Isla stood in the center of the chaos, her chest heaving, her amber eyes blazing. Every instinct that had been suppressed screamed for completion, for justice, for the blood debt owed to her murdered parents. But beneath the fury, a small voice whispered, "This is what he wanted you to become, a monster. Do not give him that satisfaction." "We are leaving," Isla stated, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. The dominance in her tone made it impossible to interpret as anything other than absolute command. "Finn comes with me. If anyone attempts to follow or interfere, I will not show this much mercy again." She looked down at the boy who had collapsed into a tight ball near the table legs. The moment her gaze found him, the crushing pressure that saturated the room seemed to part around him like a protective barrier. Finn gasped, drawing his first full breath in minutes. "Stand up, Finn," Ayla said, and this time her voice was gentle, melodic, layered with that subsonic frequency that demanded obedience without cruelty. "You are safe now. Come with me." The boy looked up, his tear-streaked face bathed in the amber light of her eyes. He scrambled to his feet and ran to hide behind her small hands, clutching the damp fabric of her servant's uniform. Rowan stepped to her side, his presence steady and grounding. His arm hovered protectively behind her back without actually touching. "We go now to Cedarfall," he said quietly, speaking only to her. "You will have sanctuary there. Protection. Time to understand what you are." Isla nodded once. She did not look back as she walked toward the dining room doors. Did not spare a glance for Celeste, who was sobbing in this corner, mascara running down her perfect face. Did not acknowledge the enforcers cowering among broken glass. Did not even look at Matthias, who was struggling to breathe against the wall, his expensive suit torn and stained. She walked through the doors, through the kitchens, where Odette and the other servants pressed themselves against the walls in stunned silence, through the grand foyer with its marble floors that she had polished on her knees 1,000 times. She walked out the front door of the Ironwood estate and did not stop walking until the forest swallowed her. Behind her, 10 years of dust and silence and servitude crumbled into ash. Ahead of her, the future waited in amber gold light. Isla Brennan was a servant no more. Sanctuary arrived in the form of towering pines and the scent of clean mountain air untainted by cruelty. The Cedarfall Pack territory sprawled across the Bitterroot Range in Montana, a world away from Ironwood's ostentatious wealth. Here, log cabins blended into ancient forests as if they had grown from the earth itself rather than been built upon it. Smoke rose from stone chimneys in lazy spirals. Children played in clearings without the constant weight of oppressive hierarchy crushing their laughter into silence. Wolves moved through the compound with purpose, but without fear, greeting each other with genuine warmth rather than calculated positioning. It was everything Ironwood pretended to be and failed at utterly. Isla stood on the porch of the cabin Rowan had assigned her, watching dawn break over the mountains. 4 weeks had passed since that night in the dining room. 4 weeks since her world had shattered and reformed into something she still did not fully recognize. Her hands gripped the railing knuckles, white with tension, that had become her constant companion. The door behind her opened with a soft creak. She did not need to turn to know who approached. His scent reached her first cedar and rain-damp earth, grounding and steady. "You should be resting," Rowan said quietly. He carried 2 steaming mugs, the herbal smell of chamomile tea cutting through the crisp morning air. Dr. Kincaid said the detoxification process would take at least another week. Isla accepted the mug he offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The contact sent warmth spreading through her chest, settling in the hollow space where fear and uncertainty had taken root. She wrapped both hands around the ceramic, letting the heat seep into her palms. "I have rested for 10 years, she said. "Every moment I spent invisible, every hour I spent silent was rest. I am done resting while the world continues without me." Rowan leaned against the railing beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. He had been careful about everything these past weeks. Careful with his proximity, careful with his words, careful not to presume anything, despite the pull between them that grew stronger each day. The detox is not rest, he said. It is your body purging poison that should have killed you. Dr. Kincaid found concentrations of wolfsbane embedded in your tissues that no omega could have survived. Your bloodline saved you, but surviving and healing are different things. Isla took a sip of tea, letting the warmth slide down her throat. Her body still ached in ways that went beyond physical pain. The fever spikes came without warning, sending her temperature soaring to dangerous heights before plummeting just as quickly. Her shifts were uncontrolled, triggered by nightmares or sudden noises. Twice she had woken in wolf form, disoriented and terrified with no memory of the transformation. I cannot sleep until Matthias is handled, Isla said, voicing the thought that circled through her mind in every quiet moment. He knows what I am now. He knows I am a threat to everything he has built. He will not simply accept sanctuary and move on. Rowan's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. Caleb's scouts have reported movement. Matthias is not waiting for the Council of Elders to convene. He is mobilizing enforcers, calling in favors, reaching out to mercenary networks. He understands that your existence makes his entire claim to Ironwood illegitimate. If you live, everything he has stolen crumbles. The words should have frightened her. Instead, Isla felt her wolf stir with something that felt disturbingly like anticipation. Let him come, she said quietly. Isla. Rowan turned to face her fully, and the concern in his eyes made her chest tighten. You have been awake for 4 weeks. You can barely control your shifts. Your wolf is powerful beyond measure, but power without control is as dangerous to you as it is to your enemies. Then teach me control. The request hung between them, charged with implications that went beyond simple training. Rowan searched her face for a long moment, and Isla met his gaze without flinching. She needed this. Needed to transform the chaos inside her into something she could wield with intention rather than instinct. Finally, Rowan nodded. There is someone you should meet first. Someone who understands what you are going through better than I ever could. Elder Maris Thornhill lived in a small cabin at the edge of Cedar Fall territory, where the forest grew thick enough to block out the midday sun. The woman who answered Rowan's knock was 73 years old, her hair white as fresh snow, her face mapped with lines that spoke of both suffering and wisdom earned through survival. But her eyes were amber gold, the same luminescent shade that had marked Isla as true alpha. So, Maris said, her voice carrying the rasp of age but none of its frailty. The Brennan bloodline survives after all. I had begun to think Matthias Corvain had succeeded in erasing it completely. Isla felt her breath catch. You knew my parents. I knew of them. I knew what they were trying to build. Maris stepped aside, gesturing them into the cabin. More importantly, I know what it is to have your nature suppressed, your identity stolen, and your existence reduced to service for those who feared what you could become. The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable. Herbs hung in bundles from the exposed beams, filling the air with the scent of sage and lavender. Books lined makeshift shelves, their spines cracked from repeated reading. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls covered in hand-drawn maps and botanical sketches. Maris settled into a worn armchair and studied Isla with unsettling intensity. 40 years ago, I was classified as a defective omega by a pack physician who was paid to lie. My alpha feared my bloodline, feared what I might become if my wolf manifested. So he kept me drugged, kept me broken, kept me convinced that I was exactly what he told me I was. Nothing. The parallels were so precise they made Isla's skin prickle. How did you break free? Pain, Maris said simply, the kind of pain that burns away everything except what is essential. My alpha beat a child for spilling wine at a formal dinner. A 5-year-old boy, and something inside me that had been sleeping for 20 years woke up screaming. She lifted her hands, and even in the firelight, Isla could see the scars crossing her palms, old burns long healed but never forgotten. I stopped him, Maris continued, and in stopping him, I discovered what I truly was. The awakening nearly killed me. The detoxification took 6 months. The learning to control what I had become took years. Her amber eyes fixed on Isla with fierce compassion. You are at the beginning of a very long journey, child. Power is the easy part. Learning to wield it without becoming the monster who caged you is where the real work begins. Isla sank into the chair across from Maris, and for the first time since the awakening, she felt something loosen in her chest. Recognition. She was not alone in this. She was not the first to walk this path. I am afraid, Isla admitted, the words emerging in barely a whisper. Not of Matthias or what he might do. I am afraid of what I felt when I threw him across that room. I wanted to kill him. I wanted to tear him apart and feel no remorse. And the worst part is that I still want it. Maris nodded slowly. Good. You should be afraid of that impulse. The moment you stop fearing it is the moment you become indistinguishable from Matthias Corvain. She stood and moved to the fireplace, adding another log to the flames. Sparks spiraled up the chimney like ascending stars. Power does not corrupt inherently, Maris said. Fear of wielding it does. When you are afraid to use your strength, you either become passive and allow evil to flourish, or you overcompensate and become the very thing you sought to destroy. The path between those extremes is narrow and difficult, but it exists. She turned back to Ayla. Your intentions remain pure. I can see it in how you speak, how you carry yourself. You do not want power for its own sake. You want justice, safety, the ability to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Hold on to that. Let it guide every choice you make, especially the hardest ones. Rowan had remained silent through the exchange, standing near the doorway with his arms crossed. Now he spoke, his voice gentle. Will you help her learn control? Maris smiled, and it transformed her weathered face into something luminous. I thought you would never ask. The training began the next morning in a clearing far from the main compound. Ayla stood barefoot in the grass, wearing simple clothes that could be easily discarded when the shift took her. The morning sun filtered through the pine canopy in shafts of golden light. Birds called to each other in the branches overhead. The world felt peaceful, unthreatened. It made the violence brewing inside her seem even more dissonant. Maris circled her, slowly assessing. Before we begin, I need you to understand something crucial. Your wolf is not separate from you. It is not a beast you control like training a dog. Your wolf is you, your instincts, your emotions, your truth unfiltered by social conditioning. When you shift, you are not becoming something else. You are becoming more yourself. That is what frightens me, Ayla said quietly. I know. Maris stopped in front of her. Close your eyes. Breathe. Feel the ground beneath your feet, the air moving across your skin, the pulse of your own heart. Your wolf lives in that rhythm. Everything else is just noise. Ayla closed her eyes and tried to focus, but the moment she turned her attention inward, she felt it. The heat beneath her ribs, the desperate need to break free and run and hunt and destroy everything that had ever caused her pain. Her eyes snapped open, glowing amber. I cannot. It is too much. I feel like I am drowning in it. Then drown, Maris said calmly. Stop fighting the current. Let it take you. Trust that you will surface on the other side. What if I do not surface? What if I lose myself completely? Rowan stepped forward from where he had been observing at the edge of the clearing. Then I will bring you back. The certainty in his voice made something in Isla's chest twist painfully. He spoke as if it were a simple fact rather than a promise, as if he would walk into any darkness to find her regardless of the cost. Again, Maris instructed, close your eyes. Breathe. This time when you feel the pressure building, do not push it down. Follow it. See where it wants to take you. Ayla obeyed, eyes closed. Deep breath in through her nose, out through her mouth. The heat swelled immediately, rising like a wave. Her instinct was to suppress it, force it back down into whatever dark corner it had come from. Instead, she followed Maris's instruction. She let it rise. Let it wash over her. Let it pull her under. The transformation hit like lightning, striking flesh. One moment, Ayla was standing on two legs, human and afraid. The next moment, she was on four paws, massive and powerful and utterly out of control. Her wolf was enormous, substantially larger than any alpha Rowan had in his pack, with a charcoal black coat that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her eyes blazed amber gold, visible even in the bright morning sun. And the instant the shift completed, every rational thought evaporated. There was only instinct. Prey, threat, territory, run. Ayla bolted. She crashed through the underbrush with no regard for direction or purpose. Branches whipped past her face. Her paws tore into the earth, propelling her forward at the speeds that made the forest blur. She could smell everything with overwhelming intensity. The deer that had passed this way hours ago. The rabbit warren hidden beneath exposed roots. The faint scent of wolf markers designating pack boundaries. And beneath it all, a scent that made her wolf focus with laser precision. Cedar and rain-damp earth. Rowan. She spun, trying to locate the source. Her massive paws slipped on wet leaves, and she went down hard, rolling through bracken before scrambling back to her feet. The rational part of her mind that had been observing this disaster with growing horror tried desperately to reassert control. Stop! You are going to hurt him. Stop running. Stop! But her wolf did not understand stop. Her wolf understood chase and hunt and claim. Rowan appeared ahead of her in human form, standing calmly in the path she had torn through the forest. He held up one hand, palm out, the gesture somehow both commanding and gentle. Isla, he said, and his voice cut through the chaos in her mind. Come here. Her wolf wanted to obey, wanted to go to him, but the momentum of the run carried her forward too fast with too much force to simply halt. She tried to stop, tried to plant her paws and arrest her charge. Instead, her attempt to break sent her sliding directly toward him, claws scrabbling for purchase on the forest floor. At the last second, she twisted her head to avoid a direct collision. Her jaws, which had been open to pant, snapped closed just inches from Rowan's arm. Close enough that she felt the fabric of his shirt brush against her teeth. Close enough that one more inch would have drawn blood. She could have killed him. The realization hit like ice water. Isla jerked backward, the shift reversing so abruptly that it left her gasping on her hands and knees in the dirt. Human again, naked and shaking and horrified by what she had almost done. I nearly killed you. The words came out, broken, choked with tears she could not hold back. I could not stop. I tried to stop and I could not, and I almost, but you did not. Rowan crouched beside her, and his voice held no fear, no accusation, just steady calm. You twisted away at the last second. Even out of control, even lost in instinct, some part of you recognized me and chose not to harm me. That is not good enough. Isla's hands dug into the earth, soil jamming beneath her fingernails. I should not need a last second. I should have control. I should be able to trust myself not to hurt people I care about. The admission hung between them. People I care about. The words were out before she could stop them, revealing more than she had intended. Rowan was silent for a moment. Then he carefully removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, giving her some measure of coverage and warmth. The gesture was so gentle, so respectful of her vulnerability, that it made her tears fall harder. 5 years ago, Rowan said quietly, rogue wolves attacked a patrol near our southern border. My mate Kira was leading that patrol. By the time I reached her, she was already gone. Bled out in the leaves while I was half a mile away, unable to help. Isla looked up at him, seeing the old pain in his eyes. For months after, I was terrified to let anyone close. Terrified that my failure to protect her meant I would fail again. That caring about someone was simply inviting another unbearable loss. He met her gaze. But living in fear of loss is not living at all. It is just existing in a smaller and smaller cage until you cannot breathe. He stood and offered her his hand. You are learning. Control takes time. You have been awake for 4 weeks after 10 years of suppression. The fact that you are shifting at all, much less maintaining enough awareness to pull back from hurting me, is remarkable. Isla stared at his outstretched hand. Behind him, Maris emerged from the trees carrying a bundle of clothes. The older woman's expression held no judgment, only patient understanding. Again, Maris said simply, you shift again, and again, and again, until your wolf understands that transformation is not an escape, but a choice. Isla wanted to refuse, wanted to curl up in the dirt and let the earth swallow her whole rather than face another loss of control. But that impulse, she realized, was just another form of the same cowardice that had kept her silent for 10 years. She took Rowan's hand and let him pull her to her feet. By the second week of training, Isla could shift without losing herself to instinct. The transformations were still jarring, still overwhelming, but she could maintain enough rational thought to follow commands. Stop. Come. Stay. Basic obedience that should have felt humiliating but instead felt like reclaiming pieces of herself. Finn had taken to following her during training sessions, watching from a safe distance with wide eyes full of admiration. The boy had barely spoken during the first week at Cedar Fall, traumatized by the violence he had witnessed and the near mutilation he had escaped. But slowly, carefully, he had begun to emerge from his shell. He sat now on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, kicking his heels against the rotting bark, while Isla practiced controlled shifts. Human to wolf and back again, over and over until her muscles screamed and her lungs burned with exhaustion. You are strongest every day, Finn called out during one of her brief rests. His voice had lost some of its tremor. Yesterday you could barely shift twice without getting dizzy. Today you have done it 7 times. Isla wiped sweat from her forehead, breathing hard. 7 times and I still feel like I am going to collapse. But you did not collapse. The observation came from Maris, who sat in the shade of an ancient pine watching the training with her characteristic intensity. You are learning to push past the point where your body says enough. That is good. In battle, your enemies will not stop simply because you are tired. Battle, the word hung in the air like smoke. It was the unspoken reality that colored all their preparations. Matthias would come. It was not a question of if, but when, as if summoned by the thought. Cole Brenner appeared at the clearing's edge. Rowan's beta moved with the economy of someone who had seen combat and learned not to waste energy on unnecessary motion. His copper hair was tied back, and his expression was grim. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "All of you." They gathered in Rowan's cabin an hour later. The space was utilitarian, built for function rather than comfort. Maps covered every available surface marked with symbols and notations that tracked packed territories, resource points, and potential threat vectors. Cole placed a new map on the central table, this one marked with fresh red ink. Our scouts identified heavy movement along the eastern approach. Matthias is mobilizing. We count at least 200 fighters, maybe more. A mix of Ironwood pack enforcers and hired mercenaries from the same networks he used to kill the Brennans. 200. The number hit Isla like a physical blow. Cedar Fall had 90 warriors, maybe 100, if they armed every able-bodied wolf in the territory. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. When Rowan asked, his voice steady despite the odds, 3 days, 4 at most. He is not waiting for council approval or legal channels. He is going to wipe Cedar Fall from the map and bury the truth along with anyone who knows it. Silence settled over the room. Isla could feel the weight of it pressing down, could see the calculation happening behind Rowan's eyes as he weighed their options. Fight and likely lose. Surrender Isla and save his pack. Flee and abandon everything they had built, all losing choices in different ways. "There is one more thing," Cole said quietly. "We got word from an unexpected source. Celeste Ashford crossed into our territory this morning. She is requesting asylum." Isla's head snapped up. "What?" "She arrived at the northern border checkpoint an hour ago, alone, no guards, no weapons. She is asking to speak with you specifically." Cole's expression was carefully neutral. "She says she has information about Matthias's plans, and she is carrying visible injuries." The implications of that last statement settled like lead in Ila's stomach. "Take me to her." They met in a small room near the infirmary. Celeste Ashford sat on a simple wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfect despite the circumstances. But the veneer of untouchable elegance had cracked. A bruise darkened her left cheekbone, the purple-black shade of an impact less than 24 hours old. Her lower lip was split, the cut still fresh enough to seep blood when she spoke. Defensive wounds marked her forearms, the kind that came from raising hands to ward off blows. Dr. Bryn Kincaid finished her examination and stepped back, her professional demeanor barely concealing anger. 3 cracked ribs, extensive bruising across the torso and upper arms, mild concussion. Whoever did this meant to cause pain without leaving marks visible to casual observation. "Matthias," Celeste said, her voice hoarse. "After Isla escaped, he needed someone to blame, someone to punish. I was convenient." She looked up, and for the first time since Isla had known her, there was no arrogance in her expression, only exhaustion and something that might have been shame. "I came to warn you," Celeste continued, "and to beg for sanctuary, not because I deserve it. I know I do not. I know what I did to you, what I allowed to happen. But I need you to understand that Matthias is not going to stop with military force." "Explain," Rowan said from his position near the door. Celeste took a shaky breath, wincing as the movement pulled at her damaged ribs. "Matthias knows he cannot defeat you in open combat. Your alliance with the Brennan bloodline makes you too powerful, and his own people are already questioning his legitimacy. So he is planning to eliminate you through treachery." She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, placing it on the small table between them. "He has contacted the same mercenary network that killed Declan and Anya Brennan. They specialize in infiltration and assassination. The attack on your borders is a diversion. While your warriors are engaged, a strike team will enter Cedar Fall from the north and eliminate key targets." Isla felt ice flood her veins. "Key targets. You, Rowan, Elder Maris, anyone who can testify to Matthias's crimes or challenge his claim." Celeste met Isla's eyes directly. "He plans to make it look like casualties of war, collateral damage in a territorial dispute. By the time the council investigates, all the witnesses will be dead and Matthias will control the narrative." The room was silent except for the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth. "Why are you telling us this?" Isla asked. Why betray him now? Celeste's hands trembled in her lap. When she spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. Because I was you once, before I became this. She gestured at herself at the designer clothes and perfect posture and carefully constructed facade. My father is an East Coast alpha who believes daughters are political assets. He arranged my marriage to Matthias when I was 19, a strategic alliance between territories. I was told it was my duty, my honor, my purpose. She laughed bitterly. Matthias seemed charming during our courtship, sophisticated, powerful. I thought I was fortunate. Tears tracked down her face, making her wince when they hit the split in her lip. The first time he hit me was 2 weeks after the wedding. I had questioned his decision to dismiss an Omega servant without cause. He backhanded me hard enough to split my cheek. Then he held me while I cried and told me he only did it because he loved me too much to tolerate disrespect, that I needed to learn my place for my own good. The confession poured out of her like poison finally lanced from a wound. For 3 years, I convinced myself that it was my fault, that if I were just better, more obedient, more perfect, he would stop. So I became exactly what he wanted. Cold, cruel. I hurt others because hurting others made me feel powerful when I felt so utterly powerless. She looked at Isla with raw anguish. I hated you because you were free to show pain, free to be human. I had to smile through mine, had to perform perfection every moment or face his fists. And the worst part is that I knew what he was doing to you, knew about the poison, knew about your parents. And I said nothing because staying silent kept me safe. Celeste stood on shaking legs, her perfect posture finally crumbling. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve sanctuary. But I could not let more people die for his ambition. I could not be silent anymore. Isla stood as well, moving slowly toward the woman who had tormented her for years. Celeste flinched, clearly expecting violence. Instead, Isla placed both hands on her shoulders, gentle but firm. Matthias made us both prisoners, Isla said quietly. He stole different things from us, broke us in different ways. But we both survived. And we both have a choice now about who we become after survival. Celeste broke. The mask shattered completely, and she collapsed forward, sobbing against Isla's shoulder. Great heaving gasps that shook her entire frame, releasing years of carefully contained anguish. Isla held her, this woman who had been her tormentor, and was now revealed as another victim of the same brutal system. You have sanctuary here, Isla said, and felt Maris's approving gaze from across the room. Help us stop him. Help us break the cycle. Then you can decide who you want to be when you are finally free. The War Council convened that night in Rowan's cabin. Maps covered the table. Reports from scouts detailed Matthias's movements. And sitting among Cedar Falls' leadership was Celeste. No longer adorned in designer clothes, but wearing simple borrowed garments, her injuries stark against her pale skin. The strike team will number 5 wolves, Celeste explained, pointing to the northern approach on the map. All former military trained in covert operations. They will wait until the main battle engages your forces, here, then move through the old logging trails that bypass your standard patrols. Cole marked the trails with red ink. We can set up ambush points, turn their stealth against them. They will expect that, Celeste countered. Matthias is paranoid. He plans for contingencies. The strike team will have multiple insertion routes prepared. Then we do not defend, Isla said, and everyone turned to look at her. We attack first. Rowan's expression was carefully neutral. Explain. Matthias expects us to wait here and prepare defenses. Expects us to react to his assault. But what if we do not wait? Isla leaned over the map, her finger tracing a path from Cedar Fall back toward the Ironwood territory. What if we force the confrontation on our terms in a location of our choosing? You want to march into his territory? Cole sounded skeptical. That gives up every defensive advantage we have. It also forces him to fight on ground where his own people can witness what happens, Maris said, catching Isla's intent. If we defeat Matthias in his own territory, in view of the Ironwood Pack, his claim crumbles immediately. No room for propaganda or false narratives. Rowan studied the map in silence for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. The disputed border, the no man's land between our territories, neutral ground visible to both packs. We force him to meet us there. He will bring his full force, Cole warned. Let him. Isla straightened, and her amber eyes began to glow faintly in the firelight. I am done hiding, done waiting for mercy from those who understand only violence. Matthias murdered my parents, poisoned me, stole 10 years of my life. If he wants to finish what he started, let him try. She looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. But this is not your fight. Cedarfall has given me sanctuary, given me a chance to understand what I am. I will not ask you to die for my vengeance. This stopped being about your vengeance the moment Matthias decided to destroy an entire pack to hide his crimes, Rowan said firmly. He is a threat to every wolf in the region. If we do not stop him now, his corruption will spread until there is no safe haven left. Maris placed a weathered hand on Isla's shoulder. Besides, child, you are not asking us to fight for you. We are choosing to fight beside you. There is a difference. Celeste spoke up from her place at the table, her voice quiet but steady. I can get you detailed information on his formations, his commanders, his mercenary contracts. Everything I learned while playing the perfect Luna. Use it. End him. The decision crystallized in that moment. No more hiding, no more waiting. In 3 days, they would march to the border and force the confrontation that had been building for 10 years. Isla excused herself as the others continued planning logistics. She needed air, needed space to process what was coming. She found herself on the porch of her cabin, again staring out at the forest that had become her sanctuary. The moon hung fat and bright above the mountains, painting everything in silver light. Footsteps on the wooden planks announced Rowan's approach. He stood beside her in comfortable silence, letting the night speak for them. Are you afraid? He asked finally. Terrified, Ayla admitted. Not of dying. I have lived as a ghost for so long that death almost seems familiar. I am afraid of surviving and not recognizing what I have become. Afraid of letting the rage consume who I was meant to be. Rowan turned to face her fully. In the moonlight, his features seemed carved from stone, beautiful in their severity. Then let me show you who you truly are. He closed the distance between them, slowly giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she did not, when she leaned into the approach instead, he cupped her face with both hands. His palms were warm against her cheeks, work-worn, but infinitely gentle. You are not the monster Matthias tried to create, Rowan said, his voice low and intense. You are the woman who saved a terrified child at risk to yourself, who offered sanctuary to someone who tormented you, who trains until exhaustion every day not to become stronger, but to ensure you never hurt the innocent. That is who you are, Isla Brennan, and that is who you will remain. He kissed her then, slow and searching, his lips soft against hers. Warmth bloomed in Isla's chest, spreading through her limbs like light chasing darkness. This was not the electric shock of fated mate bonds snapping into place. This was deeper, more deliberate, a choice they were both making with full awareness of the pinch. When they parted, Isla rested her forehead against his breathing and his scent, cedar and rain-damp earth, and something uniquely Rowan that made her wolf settle in contentment. Whatever happens at that border, she whispered, promise me something. Anything. If I lose myself in the fight, if the rage takes over and I cannot come back, you end it. You do not let me become him. Rowan pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. His expression was fierce. I will never have to make that choice because you will never lose yourself that completely. I have seen your soul, Isla, the core of who you are. It is made of the same thing that lets you survive 10 years of hell without breaking. Compassion. And compassion cannot be destroyed, only buried. I will always be here to help you dig it back to the surface. Isla wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the rage building inside her had limits, boundaries, safeguards against becoming the very thing she sought to destroy. But in 3 days, she would find out if that faith was justified. War arrived on a moonless night, dressed in the scent of pine and impending storm. The disputed border between Ironwood and Cedarfall territories was a jagged line of towering Douglas firs, their trunks thick enough that 3 grown wolves could not circle them with linked arms. The clearing at the center had been neutral ground for generations, a place where packs met to resolve disputes without bloodshed. Tonight, it would become an arena where justice and corruption would finally collide. Isla stood at the edge of the tree line, feeling the weight of 90 Cedarfall warriors at her back. Rowan commanded the left flank with Cole at his side. Maris held the right with a group of older fighters whose experience compensated for what they had lost in speed. And scattered throughout the formation were the 40 Ironwood wolves who had defected over the past weeks, driven from their home by loyalty to truth rather than a false alpha. Among them stood Celeste, no longer adorned in designer elegance, but wearing simple combat leathers, her healing ribs wrapped tight beneath the protective gear. She had refused to remain behind at the compound, insisting that her place was here, bearing witness to the end of the nightmare she had helped perpetuate. He is late, Cole observed, his voice carrying just enough to reach Isla's position. Making us wait, building tension. Classic intimidation tactic. Let him play his games, Isla said quietly. We are not the ones who should be afraid tonight. But she was afraid, not of Matthias or his mercenaries. She was afraid of the thing living in her chest. The rage that had been building for 10 years and now strained against every restraint she had learned to construct. Tonight that rage would have permission to break free. The question was whether she could cage it again when the battle ended. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky remained cloudless. The storm was still hours away, but the air carried that electric tension that preceded violence, natural or otherwise. Then across the clearing, lights appeared, headlights cutting through the darkness as vehicles approached from the Ironwood side. Dozens of them forming a semicircle that bathed the neutral ground in harsh white light. The vehicles disgorged their passengers, enforcers in tactical gear, mercenaries wearing the unmarked black of hired killers. They moved with military precision, forming ranks that spoke of training and discipline. Isla counted quickly. 200, just as Celeste had warned, possibly more hidden in reserve. At the center of the formation, Matthias Corvain emerged from a black SUV. He wore no suit tonight, no pretense of civilization. He was dressed for war in reinforced combat gear, his broad shoulders made even more imposing by the tactical vest strapped across his chest. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his pale amber eyes scanning the opposing force with predatory assessment. Beside him walked Dr. Edmund Vale, looking small and terrified, clearly brought along under duress. And behind them, 4 council elders in formal robes, their presence meant to lend legitimacy to whatever farce Matthias had planned. Rowan Ashcroft! Matthias's voice boomed across the clearing, amplified by the strange acoustics of the space. You stand in violation of territorial law, harboring a criminal who attacked her rightful alpha and fled pack justice. Return Isla Brennan to Ironwood custody, and I will consider your offense a misunderstanding rather than an act of war. Rowan stepped forward, his own voice calm and carrying despite the lack of volume. Isla Brennan is the rightful alpha of Ironwood Pack by blood and law. You are the criminal Corvain. Murderer, thief, usurper. We are here to ensure you answer for those crimes. Matthias laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to make several of his own fighters flinch. Rightful alpha, she is a broken omega who experienced a psychotic break at a formal dinner. Whatever biological anomaly allowed her temporary display of dominance is irrelevant. Dr. Vale's diagnosis stands. She is defective. Then why do you need 200 fighters to retrieve one defective omega? Isla called out, stepping forward to stand level with Rowan. She had dressed simply. No armor, no weapons, just dark clothing that would not restrict movement when the shift took her. Her hair was pulled back in a single braid, her face scrubbed clean of anything ornamental. She looked exactly like what she was. A weapon honed by suffering and refined by purpose. Matthias's eyes fixed on her, and the hatred there was pure and undiluted. Because you are a rabid dog that needs to be put down, and I do not take chances with rabid animals. Enough, Elder Thaddeus Wren stepped forward from the group behind Matthias. The old wolf was 80 if he was a day, his white hair thin and his back stooped, but his voice carried authority. We are not here for posturing. The council has convened to hear testimony and evidence regarding the disputed claim to Ironwood territory. All parties will be heard. Finally, Maris murmured from Isla's right. Sense from someone. But Isla noticed how the other 3 elders avoided Thaddeus's gaze. Noticed the way they positioned themselves closer to Matthias. Celeste had warned that half the council was corrupted by bribes. Clearly, Matthias had ensured his paid allies would be present tonight. I call for testimony, Elder Wren continued. Dr. Edmund Vale, you classified Isla Brennan as a defective omega 10 years ago. Do you stand by that diagnosis? Dr. Vale looked like a man caught between predator and cliff edge. His eyes darted to Matthias, then to Isla, then to the crowd of witnesses surrounding them. I classified her as ordered, he said, his voice cracking. Alpha Corvain instructed me to suppress her biology with Wolf's Bane and falsify the diagnosis. Murmurs rippled through both armies. Several of Matthias's own enforcers exchanged uncertain glances. Lies, Matthias snarled. The doctor is being coerced by Cedarfall. His testimony is worthless. Then perhaps you will value my testimony more, Celeste said, stepping forward. The bruises on her face had faded from purple to yellow-green, but they remained visible in the harsh light. I was your mate, your confidant. I know everything. She reached into her jacket and withdrew a slim recording device, holding it up for all to see. 3 nights ago, before you beat me unconscious, you detailed your entire plan. How you embezzled $8.7 million through Ironwood Ventures. How you hired mercenaries to kill Declan and Anya Brennan. How you bribed council members to legitimize your claim. You thought I was too afraid to ever betray you. You were wrong. She pressed play. Matthias's voice emerged from the speaker, tinny but clear. Words that detailed every crime, every bribe, every calculated murder. The recording ran for 3 minutes that felt like hours. When it ended, the silence was absolute. Fabricated, Matthias said, but his voice lacked conviction. Digital manipulation. Anyone can. I have the financial records, called a new voice. A man emerged from the Cedar Fall ranks. Jasper Harrow was unremarkable in appearance, middle-aged and balding, wearing glasses that reflected the headlights. But he carried a briefcase that suddenly seemed more dangerous than any weapon on the field. Forensic accounting from Deloitte, Jasper said, opening the case and withdrawing thick folders of documentation. $8.7 million embezzled over 10 years. Shell companies. False invoices, and most damningly direct payments to the Blackthorn mercenary network, timestamped to match the night Declan and Anya Brennan were killed. He held up the documents. Every transaction, every bribe, every lie, all documented and verified by independent auditors. Matthias's face had gone the color of old snow. Around him, his fighters shifted uneasily. Even the corrupted elders looked uncomfortable, realizing the evidence was too substantial to dismiss. This is a conspiracy, Matthias growled, his composure finally cracking. A coordinated attack by Cedarfall to steal Ironwood territory. You have no authority here, Wren. I am Alpha of Ironwood Pack, and I will not be judged by outsiders and traitors. Then let your own people judge you, Isla said. She raised her voice to carry to every wolf present from both packs. Ironwood wolves who have lived under Corvain's rule. You have heard the testimony, heard the evidence. You know what he has done, what he continues to do. How many of you have lost loved ones to his convenient accidents? How many have watched Omegas disappear into servitude? How many have stayed silent because speaking truth meant becoming his next victim? A ripple moved through Matthias's formation. Small at first, subtle shifts in posture, wolves looking at each other rather than at their alpha. Then one enforcer, a heavy-set man with graying temples, stepped out of formation. My sister, he said, his voice rough with emotion. She questioned an order 5 years ago. The next week she was dead. Fell down the stairs, you said, but I found the bruises on her neck that looked exactly like finger marks. Another wolf stepped forward, then another, then a dozen. Testimonies poured out like water from a broken dam. Abuse, murder, theft, corruption. Every crime cataloged and witnessed and finally given voice. Enough, Matthias roared, and the shift took him midward. His human form exploded into his wolf, a massive dark brown beast that radiated aggression from every hair. He threw back his head and howled a sound that was equal parts rage and desperation. It was the signal his mercenaries had been waiting for. The battle erupted with sudden violence. Hired killers surged forward, and Cedar Falls warriors met them head-on. The clearing became a chaos of fur and fangs and desperate combat. Wolves shifted mid-charge, their transformations fluid and practiced. The sound was overwhelming. Snarls and screams and the meaty impact of bodies colliding. Cole led a wedge formation through the center, his copper-colored wolf, larger than most his combat experience, evident in every calculated strike. Maris fought with the economy of age, conserving energy and striking only when the blow would count, her amber eyes blazing, as she demonstrated that decades had not diminished her lethality. And through it all, Matthias charged directly at Isla. His brown wolf was huge, nearly as large as her own true alpha form, driven by fury and desperation. His jaws were open, aiming for her throat, intent on ending this quickly and brutally. Isla did not shift. Not yet. She raised one hand palm out and released a concentrated wave of dominance. The pressure hit Matthias like a physical wall. His charge faltered. His paws scrambled for purchase as the sheer weight of her bloodline pressed down on him. He made it within 10 feet before his legs gave out and he crashed to the earth, whimpering. Around the battlefield, the effect rippled outward. Ironwood wolves caught in the wave dropped where they stood, their biology overriding loyalty or training. Only the mercenaries, who were not pack wolves and thus not subject to the hierarchical pheromone response, continued fighting. You stole everything from me, Isla said, walking slowly toward Matthias's prone form. My parents, my childhood, my identity. You turned me into a ghost and called it mercy. She knelt beside him close enough that her voice would carry only to his wolf-sensitive ears. I should kill you. I want to kill you. I have dreamed about tearing you apart since the moment I understood what you took from me. Matthias's wolf eyes, pale amber and filled with hatred, glared up at her. But killing you would make me exactly what you tried to create. Isla continued. I will not become you, Matthias Corvain. She stood and stepped back, releasing the dominance hold. Matthias scrambled to his feet, shifting back to human form naked and shaking with rage. Then you are weak, he spat. Just like your father. He had chances to eliminate me and chose mercy. Look where mercy got him. Dead in the dirt, while I took everything he built. My father built something you could never understand, Isla said. He built it on loyalty and justice, and the belief that strength should protect rather than oppress. You did not take what he built. You stole the shell and let everything valuable rot away. She turned to address the assembled wolves, friend and foe alike. I am Isla Brennan, daughter of Declan and Anya, true alpha of Ironwood Pack by blood and law. I challenge Matthias Corvain's claim to this territory, but I will not settle that challenge through death. We have seen enough death, enough violence, enough fear. Elder Wren stepped forward, his elderly face grave. What do you propose? A trial, Ela said. Public, with every wolf from both packs as witness. Let Matthias confess his crimes before those he has ruled. Let the victims speak. Let justice be restorative, rather than simply destructive. No, Matthias's voice was feral. I will not be judged by weaklings and traitors. If you want Ironwood, you fight me for it. Traditional challenge. To the death. He shifted again, his wolf form bristling with aggression. Isla sighed. She had hoped to avoid this, hoped that evidence and testimony would be enough. But some men understood only violence, and Matthias Corvain had built his entire world on it. Very well, she said quietly. Then she shifted. The transformation was instantaneous. One moment a woman standing in the clearing, the next moment a colossal charcoal black wolf whose amber eyes blazed like captured stars. She was substantially larger than Matthias, larger than any wolf on the field. Her presence alone made the fighting around them pause as combatants on both sides turned to witness what was unfolding. Matthias charged with the desperation of a cornered animal. He aimed low, trying to use his momentum to bowl her over. It was a sound tactic. Larger opponents could be toppled if hit at the right angle with sufficient force. Isla did not move. The impact when Matthias hit her was like a mortal dog striking a mountain. He might as well have charged a boulder. Isla's paws remained planted, her massive frame absorbing the collision without even swaying. Matthias bounced off her chest and stumbled backward, stunned. Before he could recover, Isla surged forward. Her jaws closed on his scruff, not to kill but to dominate. She lifted him completely off the ground, his paws scrambling uselessly in the air, and then she drove him down into the earth with controlled force. The impact shuddered through the clearing. Dust rose around them. Isla placed one massive paw on Matthias's heaving chest, pinning him. She leaned down until her glowing amber eyes were inches from his terrified gaze. And then she did something that made every wolf present flinch in sympathetic response. She roared. The sound was not just noise. It was a physical force that rattled teeth and made the very ground beneath them tremble. It carried every ounce of her true alpha bloodline, the ancient power of the first forest kings made manifest in a single sustained note of absolute dominance. It was the ultimate demand for submission. Beneath her paw, under the crushing weight of divine hierarchy, Matthias's spirit finally broke. His wolf whimpered, his tail tucked between his legs, his ears flattened completely against his skull. And in a gesture that every wolf recognized as unconditional surrender, he bared his throat, exposing the vulnerable flesh to her fangs. The clearing fell silent. 200 wolves stood witness to the moment a false king yielded to the true heir. Isla held the position for 3 long heartbeats, making sure every witness understood what they were seeing. Then she shifted back to human form, standing over Matthias's prone wolf, with her chest heaving from exertion. Shift, she commanded. Matthias obeyed. His transformation revealed a broken man naked and trembling on the cold ground. Gone was the arrogant alpha who had ruled through fear. In his place was simply a criminal facing justice. Elder Wren approached slowly, his elderly face grave but satisfied. The challenge is settled. Matthias Corvain has yielded. By the laws that govern our kind, his claim to Ironwood Pack is forfeit. He turned to address the assembled wolves. I call for testimony. Any who have suffered under Corvain's rule, speak now. Let justice be witnessed and documented. They came forward in a flood. Enforcers who had been ordered to commit atrocities. Omegas who had suffered years of abuse. Families who had lost loved ones to Matthias's convenient accidents. One by one they spoke their truth, their voices building into a chorus of accusation that could not be denied. When the testimonies ended, Elder Wren turned to Isla. As the rightful alpha, the judgment falls to you. What sentence do you pass on Matthias Corvain? Every eye in the clearing fixed on Isla. This was the moment that would define her leadership. The choice between vengeance and justice. Isla looked down at the man who had murdered her parents, stolen her identity, and poisoned her for 10 years. The rage inside her howled for his blood, for the satisfaction of ending him the way he had ended so many others. But beneath the rage was Maris's voice, Rowan's steady presence, Finn's terrified eyes watching from the edge of the clearing. All the people who had shown her that strength could be compassionate. Matthias Corvain, Isla said, her voice carrying to every witness. You are guilty of murder, embezzlement, bribery, abuse of power, and countless other crimes. You have destroyed lives, corrupted institutions, and poisoned the very concept of leadership. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Death would be mercy you do not deserve. It would end your suffering while the suffering you caused echoes through generations. So instead, I sentence you to life as the thing you most despise. You are stripped of all rank and title. You are classified as Omega, and you are exiled to the rogue territories beyond pack protection where your survival will depend entirely on the mercy of strangers. Gasps rippled through the crowd. It was a harsh sentence, perhaps crueler than execution. But it was not death. It left open the possibility, however remote, of redemption. The council is dissolved and will be reformed, Isla continued, with representatives from all classes, including Omegas. The elders who accepted bribes are removed from power, their assets seized and redistributed to those who suffered under their corruption. She turned to face the Ironwood wolves who had remained loyal to Matthias out of fear rather than choice. Those who committed crimes under orders will face restorative justice. You will work to repair what you broke. You will listen to those you harmed, and you will prove through action that you deserve a place in the new pack we build together. Finally, she looked at Celeste. You asked for the chance to make amends. You will have it. You will direct the Omega Sanctuary we establish. You will use your experience to identify and protect those suffering what you suffered. And you will demonstrate every day that people can choose to be better than their worst moments. Celeste collapsed to her knees, sobbing with relief and gratitude. Elder Wren stepped forward, his elderly face soft with approval. Then it is settled. I recognize Isla Brennan as the rightful alpha of Ironwood Pack, and I propose an alliance between Ironwood and Cedarfall united under shared leadership and common purpose. He turned to Rowan. Alpha Ashcroft, do you accept this proposal? Rowan moved to stand beside Isla, his presence solid and grounding. I accept. Not as a conqueror claiming territory, but as an equal partner, building something better than what came before. He looked at Isla and something passed between them. Partnership, mutual respect, the foundation of something that could grow into genuine transformation. Then let it be witnessed, Elder Wren declared. A new era begins tonight. The aftermath of battle stretched through the night and into the gray dawn. Wounded needed treatment, dead needed burial, prisoners needed processing. Isla moved through it all in a daze of exhaustion, helping where she could, speaking with families, answering questions. It was nearly noon when a messenger arrived, a young wolf from the outer territories, travel-worn and urgent. Alpha Brennan, he said, bowing deeply, I carry a message from the Cascade territories marked urgent. He handed her a sealed envelope. Isla's hands trembled as she broke the wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief message written in unfamiliar handwriting. Your mother lives. The night of the attack, she was wounded but survived. The elders who helped Matthias conspired to hide her, fearing her testimony. She has been held in the Cascade territories for 10 years prisoner and insurance against future complications. Now that Matthias has fallen, she can be freed. Come to the Cascade border. Proof will be provided. A friend who seeks justice. The world tilted. Isla read the message 3 times, certain she was hallucinating. Her mother was dead. She had grieved that death for 10 years. But what if it was true? She looked up to find Rowan watching her with concern. She handed him the letter without speaking. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to careful skepticism. It could be a trap. Matthias had allies we have not yet identified. I know, Isla said, but her heart was pounding with desperate hope. But what if it is true? What if she is alive and I do nothing? She looked at the pack members working to dismantle the battlefield. At the new beginning they had fought so hard to create. At the responsibilities she had just accepted. And she looked at the letter again, at the possibility that her mother might be within reach. Tomorrow, Isla decided, we will investigate together, carefully, with full precautions. She met Rowan's eyes. But if there is even a chance she lives, I have to pursue it. Rowan pulled her close. Then tomorrow we go to the Cascade Territories, together, and we discover if this friend brings truth or simply more elaborate lies. The mating ceremony took place that evening at sunset before they would depart to investigate the mysterious letter. Both packs gathered in a clearing decorated with wildflowers and lit by hundreds of candles. Isla wore a simple white dress, her hair loose and woven with small flowers that Finn had picked. She carried no weapons, no symbols of rank, just herself offered honestly. Rowan stood waiting at the center dressed in traditional ceremonial clothing. His expression when he saw her was one of pure wonder. Elder Wren officiated. We gather to witness the binding of two alphas, two packs, two futures into one. This is not a joining born from conquest or compulsion, but from choice freely made. He turned to Isla. Isla Brennan, do you offer yourself to Rowan Ashcroft as equal partner, co-leader, and mate? I do, Isla said, her voice steady. Rowan Ashcroft, do you offer yourself to Isla Brennan as equal partner, co-leader, and mate? I do, Rowan replied. Then seal your bond before these witnesses. They moved together, meeting in the center of the sacred space. The claiming bites were exchanged simultaneously, each marking the other's throat in the traditional placement. The pain was sharp and immediate, but it faded quickly into a deep, thrumming warmth that spread through Isla's entire body. The mate bond snapped into place with the force of recognition. Suddenly, she could feel Rowan's emotions as clearly as her own, his fierce joy, his absolute certainty that they would build something worthy together. And through the bond, she felt him experiencing her emotions in return. Her fear and hope tangled together, her determination to be worthy of the trust placed in her, her slowly growing belief that maybe possibly she deserved happiness. When they parted, both bearing fresh claiming marks, the assembled wolves erupted in celebration. Howls rose toward the darkening sky, carrying joy and relief and the promise of new beginnings. Maris approached with Finn in tow. The boy carried a small wooden box carved with intricate designs. Your mother asked me to keep this safe, Maris said, placing the box in Isla's hands. She made me promise to give it to you when you claimed your birthright. Isla opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside lay a simple silver pendant shaped like a wolf in mid-leap, and beneath it a letter in her mother's handwriting. My dearest Isla, if you are reading this, then the worst has come to pass, and your father and I are gone. I am sorry we could not stay to guide you through what comes next, but I want you to know that you are stronger than any darkness that tries to claim you. You carry the Brennan bloodline, which means you carry the capacity for great power. But more importantly, you carry our love, our belief in justice tempered by mercy, our commitment to using strength to protect rather than oppress. Whatever you have endured to reach this moment, know that it does not define you. Your choices define you. Your compassion defines you. Your refusal to become the very thing you fight against defines you. Be strong, my daughter, but more than that, be kind. The world has enough warriors. It needs leaders who remember that every act of violence, even justified violence, carries a cost. I love you. I am proud of you. And I will be watching from whatever comes after, celebrating every victory and mourning every loss alongside you. Your mother, Anya Brennan. Scylla read the letter 3 times, tears streaming freely down her face. When she finally looked up, she found herself surrounded by family. Not the family she had been born into, but the one she had chosen and been chosen by. Rowan at her side, his hand warm in hers. Maris with her weathered wisdom. Finn with his innocent hope. Celeste slowly earning redemption. Cole and the Cedarfall warriors who had risked everything for justice. The Ironwood wolves brave enough to testify against tyranny. All of them damaged in different ways. All of them choosing to heal together rather than suffer alone. Thank you, Ela whispered to the memory of her mother, for the reminder, for the love, for believing I could become someone worthy of this moment. The celebration continued as night fell. Music and food and laughter that seemed impossible given the violence of recent days. But that was the nature of survival. Joy was not earned through the absence of pain. It was claimed despite pain. Isla danced with Rowan beneath stars that seemed brighter than she remembered. She listened to Maris tell stories of the old days. She watched Finn play with other children his age, finally free to simply be a child. And slowly, carefully, she let herself believe that this was real. That she had not just survived, but transformed. That the girl who had spent 10 years scrubbing floors had become a woman who would spend the next decades building something better. Near midnight, as the celebration wound down, Rowan found her standing at the edge of the firelight, the mysterious letter still tucked in her dress pocket. "Whatever we find tomorrow," he said quietly, "we face it together." Isla nodded, leaning into his solid warmth. Through the mate bond, she felt his concern, his commitment, his absolute certainty that they would navigate whatever came next. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. The celebration continued behind them, Chomo joy and hope, and hard-won peace filling the clearing. Tomorrow they would investigate the letter. Tomorrow they would discover if her mother lived, or if this was simply another test. But tonight, surrounded by chosen family and hard-won peace, Isla let herself simply be. A woman who had survived the unsurvivable. A leader learning to wield power with compassion. A daughter who had never stopped missing her mother. Isla Brennan had spent 10 years in the dust, learning patience and survival. She had spent 4 weeks discovering her power and purpose. Tonight she stood as alpha, as mate, as leader of a pack, choosing restoration over revenge. The journey was far from over. But for the first time in 10 years, Isla faced the unknown future not with fear, but with hope. And that perhaps was the greatest transformation of all.